Priscilla Barrera with the Investing News Network, and here with me today is Brent Cook and Joe Mazumdar of Exploration Insight. Brent, Joe, thank you so much for being here.
Good to see you.
All right. So we're here at PDAC once again. My first question for you is, what would be your best tip for investors that are coming to a convention of this size?
Stay hydrated.
Okay.
Other than that, I think it's really worthwhile going through all the booths downstairs, visiting with companies, talking to presidents and whatever, geologists of companies they own, get a good feel for what's going on with that company, and make some decisions. I mean, this is a good time to cut what's not working and buy what might work. Just cut the things you're not excited about and buy something you're excited about.
Right.
This is a good time to do it.
Yeah. Joe, any other tips?
I would say focus. So we come into this convention knowing what you want to look at, like in terms of commodity focus or regional focus, and that way when you select through the companies there are, because there's quite a few companies, to say I want to see these 6 companies and spend more time with those companies than 5 minutes with every company.
All right. And Joe, I'm going to stay with you for a second. There's been a lot of talk about M&A activity in the gold space. What would you say is the right strategy for an investor right now with all this M&A trend going on?
Well, I mean, the biggest M&A trend, I mean, we've talked a lot about M&A last year with smaller companies, but now what we're seeing is these mega mergers. And those mega mergers is really an attempt by the biggest companies to be the biggest fish in a small bowl, to be relevant. And that fight for relevance is right now between Newmont and Barrick. What looks like for the mid-tiers is there'll be assets that come out of these mergers and get divested, and so the potential for them is to acquire operating assets. And we know over the last few years the Australian companies who have picked up these sorts of assets from majors have done quite well. So that's one potential, is these companies acquiring those assets. And then also when you look for juniors, they'll have to look for who they partner with. And so if you've got a junior that's partnered with a major, that's probably a good place to be, because they might use them more to help them on exploration and looking at ground. And so depending who you pick, I think you want to sort of make sure that junior has that sort of exposure to a big company.
All right. And Brent, what would you say makes a good takeover deal for a junior miner?
A takeover deal. I guess if you're talking about a joint venture that they've structured, it's really important for a junior company in a partnership with a major that there are strong financial commitments, expenditure commitments over a set period of time, and if that's not met, the company gets the 100% back of the project. You want to get taken to the point where there's a feasibility of some sort, so we've got a valuation on it, and if the partner wants to take it out, hopefully that's at a premium. And you're always after a premium on a takeout. So that's sort of what I would go for. And if you're a junior working the project on your own, you'd better have a real good, quick idea early on if your concept is going to work, what the economics will be behind it if you're successful, and have in the back of your mind who is going to buy this. Because it's no point finding something and bring it up to a PEA level if no one's going to buy it, because then you dilute yourself out and dilute your shareholders. So those are 2 things I think I'd watch for.
All right. And moving away from M&A activity, are there any trends that investors might be missing right now? Is there something they should be paying attention to that is not being talked about enough right now?
Well, I think the overall trend is that we're not finding near enough new deposits to replace what we're producing. That's sort of like, and that's a big long-term trend, and it's going to get worse. It's not getting easier to find deposits. It's harder for a number of reasons. And even when you're successful, it takes much longer to develop it. So if XYZ company makes a big porphyry discovery in Peru this week, it'll be 10 to 15 years before it goes into production probably, because of everything involved in it. So I guess what I'm getting back to is there's a real need for new deposits, and that's not being talked about. And then we're seeing majors put a lot more money into junior companies, either via placements, financings, or joint ventures, which tells us again that they see this coming and they want to be in the right places with the right people.
Right. And Joe, just looking over at base metals, are you optimistic about base metals explorers this year, and what do you think is next for junior miners in that space?
Well, I think with gold as well as with a lot of base metals, the same issue. Not enough exploration, and long term there's a gap. I mean, if we look specifically at the copper sector, which we like, copper's done quite well this year. I think it's up 20-25%. So that's telling you there's near-term supply issues, but then there's long-term supply issues, because we know that these projects, if you don't find one today, you're not going to fill a gap that's coming in 10 years. And so the difference between the copper sector and the gold sector is there's much more exploration done by juniors in the gold sector, much less done by juniors in the copper sector, because it tends to be more expensive. So if you want to get junior exposure in terms of a copper company, it's harder to find one in the right jurisdiction and things like that. But basically we like the idea of doing that, but it's just more expensive for some of these guys to actually fund copper exploration rather than gold. And so it's rarer right now to find copper explorers.
Right. And Brent, would you be able to share with our audience maybe what was an investment that didn't do that well last year, and maybe one that did great, or a strategy or commodity you thought it was going to do well and it didn't?
I got the
long list. No, I think one thing that's been disappointed us is the zinc market. The prices did well, it's backed off and it's doing well again. But we own a couple of companies that have really nice zinc deposits, but the market's just not recognizing. So that's been a real frustrating, I think. That, we've got the right company, right project, but there's just no interest in it. So I guess that's kind of been my biggest disappointment. What was the second part of the question?
I mean, any investments that didn't do well last year, aside from commodities, any
Well, those
stocks?
would be the zinc project. Ones that have done well. Sandstorm's done well. And there's one, Evrim Resources, which we bought it around 15 cents, added it at 50 cents after they put out some initial trench results that looked positive. We took money off the table at $1.30, so it was a win up to that point, but we saved a bunch. We saved some as well. Newmont put money in at $1.50. Drilling came out and it collapsed down to 30 cents. So the company's now got $11 million. It's in much better shape. We're happy to own it and think it's a great stock.
And we bought more at 30, actually.
Yeah, and we've added to it at that price. But it was it's a success, but a failure, or vice versa. And that's just exploration, but we're in with good people, doing good things, and the company's better shape now than it was.
Right. And Joe, are there any geographical areas that you think have the potential to have the next new discovery this year? Is there any area that you like right now?
Well, I mean, we've always been sort of anti-Ecuador, but from what I'm understanding is that every agreement with the government can be different. So we're going to take another look at Ecuador. I mean, I worked there back in 2000, and it was always highly prospective, but it was Ecuador. It seems right now that the fact that BHP is there, Fortescue is there, Newcrest is there, we don't want to have an internal bias against the country, but if somebody's willing to go there and buy the company that we invest in, we're okay with that. We don't need to live through the life cycle of the operation. We just need to have enough people in that country that agree with its prospectivity and believe that they could develop the project. But we don't have to take it right through the life cycle. We'd rather be out of it after that company just gets bought out, and it needs to have that compelling asset to do it.
I think Bolivia is getting better as well, and Colombia is going downhill. Peru is still the same, good. Chile is good. Argentina, depends on where you're at. So, I mean, there's a lot of places in the world to go looking and make discoveries. It's all about risk to reward in terms of jurisdiction.
And it's subtle too. It's not just the country. It's like Brent was saying, there's a region of a country that's much better and another place that you would never go to. So you really need that nuance in areas.
Right. My last question for you today. You can give me your top stock for this year, maybe one each, Brent, Joe, Who wants to start?
You can start.
Okay. I mean, in terms of liquid stocks,
Yeah.
Because if we think that the gold price is going up, the gold price did fairly well from, I think it was like the middle of August to late February, when it got up to about 1340, 1350. But now it's come back down to just below 1300. I think it closed last Friday. The thing is that we're seeing higher lows. So if we see a bounce back in the gold price, then the first ones that actually feel it are the producers. And so if we were talking about a liquid producer with growth opportunities, we'd say Sandstorm, a royalty streaming company. That would be our top pick on that side. So
I'll go with an exploration stock. Nothing people haven't heard already, but Marisol Resources. They've got they got in the order of $13 to $14 million spent by their partners on their behalf to earn into projects in Chile and Argentina. The ex-president, Steve Nano, has turned up large systems and staked the whole thing. They've never been drilled. These are the sorts of things the majors want, and that's where the big discoveries come from. So the fact that he's got majors coming in, committed to spending a lot of money on a number of projects scattered across that region, I think it's, there's a reasonable shot that there's a discovery made this year.
All right. Thank you so much for being here today.
all right, thanks for having us.
All right. Once again, I'm Priscilla Barrera with the Investing News Network, and here with me were Brent Cook and Joe Mazumdar of Exploration Insights.